So since I talk about lenses so much on the channel, let's just start off with talking about while I was setting up this headshot here, this A-roll, if you want to call it that. I had the Sigma 35mm f1.4 on, and it's something I've been using more because it can shoot on full frame versus the Sigma H/35, which is like one of my favorite go-to lenses for stuff like this. The 35mm Sigma, the f1.4 version, focus breathes like really bad. So for video work and for cinema work or whatever, just keep that in mind if you want to use that lens. So I actually switched to the H/35. I'm shooting on Super 35 anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But that one barely focus breathes at all at 35mm, which is like the coolest thing about that lens. It just goes to show how cool that lens is for the cost. Just kind of look at how the autofocus. The autofocus is not amazing on the Komodo by any means, but look, the focus breathing is like almost non-existent. So bad on the f1.4. Anyways, we are talking about lenses today. If you watch my last video, I made a video over the Nisi Athena lenses. Super cool lenses, very clean, very perfect. And when I did that shoot, when I actually shot that kind of setup with those lenses, I actually did the exact same setup with the dual lens APO prime lenses as well, because a lot of you, even though I did a brief overview over those lenses already, a lot of you still wanted me to do a full review and talk about it more. And I've actually shot on the dual lens lenses now for like the past 3 or 4 projects that I've done, even professional projects. I have a lot more experience with them and I have more to say about them. So when doing those tests on the last video, I actually was using the Red Dragon Super 35, but with the dual lens, I wanted to shoot it with the speed booster to give that more full frame look and see how they performed like that, because that's how I've been using them in my camera kit on my professional projects and so on. So I was using the dual lens APO primes with the EF mount and on the speed booster on my Komodo. So your results will vary ever so slightly if you use it on a full frame camera. All that to be said, doesn't really matter. Even lately, I've been just really liking not shooting very shallow, which is interesting about the dual lens lenses, and we should start with that right now. They actually are a T2.4 lens, which is much slower than most other lenses on the market right now that cover full frame and are in this price point. That being said, they're also marked as f2 lenses. So I don't know the exact science behind this, but basically my understanding of that is, a T-stop is the transmission of light to the sensor versus an f-stop, which is calculating your actual aperture size. So I think it's basically saying that the aperture, the image circle is big like an f2, but you're getting some light loss through the glass when it gets to the sensor. So that's why they're a T2.4 lens. What's cool about that is that the bokeh tends to look more shallow than it actually is advertising. And so to touch on that a little more, basically they're T2.4, but when you're shooting on them, especially with the speed booster, you're never really like thinking that you need to go more shallow. You're never like, oh man, I wish I had more light. I wish I could go more shallow. It's never been an issue for me. I actually really like the look of these lenses because just a little bit more is in focus on your subject. And that's something that I've actually been really into lately. Right now we're shooting Super 35 at f2.8. I'm not even shooting wide open like, kind of the new thing is. So when shooting these professionally, it actually made things just feel a lot better because you've got all the characteristics of the dual lens kind of vintage style vibe while keeping your subject in focus and having some sharpness to it. So quick overview, these lenses are all roughly, I don't know, $1,000 a piece. They come in a 31, a 43, a 58, and an 85, and they're about to add a 21mm to the lineup. I really love these focal lengths. It's fun that the focal lengths are not like the other standard focal lengths that you find in a lens set, which gives you just a little bit extra, you know, just a change of perspective compared to other lenses on the market. I primarily shot with the 43 and 58 for my projects. Every once in a while I would throw the 31 on. I was using the 31 more when I was shooting Super 35 and not shooting with the speed booster or full frame. They're all the same size, they all have gearing in the same spot. They do have different weights compared to like the Nisi Athenas, that they were all weighted the same, which is a really cool feature. That's not the case for these, but they all have an 80mm outer diameter, and I believe it's a 72mm filter thread. And all the focus gears are in the same spot, and the aperture is in the same spot with their gears, and that's appropriate for a cinema lens. The focus gear throw is nice and long. It's got a pretty nice feel to it, but I do have to say the aperture is very tight, which in most cases is good. You don't want the aperture to come loose when you're shooting and then change the exposure or change your T-stop not where you want it. So it's okay, that's a little stiff. Something else to note about that is when it's on a PL mount, if you're using the PL mount version of this, it gets really close to the back of the PL mount. Like the gear is almost touching it. It's almost barely enough to putting like a follow focus motor on there if you wanted to do something like that. So keep that in mind. It gets very tight. Clearance is very tight on that. But that being said, what's cool about it is that you can manually swap from PL to EF with these lenses at any given point. You can buy EF backs or PL backs for them, and with just 5 screws and a Torx wrench, you can pull them right off and swap them out and shim them if you need to. I actually did this multiple times. I used some cameras with PL and some cameras with EF, and I was swapping them back all the time, and it's probably the easiest swap I've ever had to do on a lens before. And that's something I really like, because there's just so many times we might be on a different camera that doesn't have the right mount, and then you're always trying to fumble, be like, oh, I guess I gotta use these lenses instead, and stuff like that. It's just really nice that these have that ability. They are APO primes. Basically what that means is there's no chromatic aberration. Between the coatings and the shape of the glass, they're able to actually remove all of the chromatic aberration issues that you might have. I hate chromatic aberration. Sometimes it gives a look and a vibe and a feel to the bokeh, but in most cases when I'm in a professional environment, I do not want chromatic aberration. I do not want a light to backlight something and get a big pink halo around my subject without me wanting that in the first place. I want full control, so APO is nice. Just like the Nisi Athenas, which are not APO but have very minimal chromatic aberration, with these you're just simply not gonna have any at all. These lenses look really cool. It's really fun to compare them to the Nisi Athena. I did, like I said, shoot with the speed booster, so you're gonna see the focal lengths change a little bit compared to the Athenas. But I did the exact same sequence that I did in the last video, where my model was walking in. Ryan Mignani, thank you so much for being in the video. Walking through, you know, walking into the kitchen. On that opening doorknob shot there, we're much wider because we're on the speed booster, and it looks really nice. I really like the bokeh rendition on that doorknob shot. And then the rest of it doesn't look that different, kind of interestingly enough. Shooting with the speed booster at T2.4 versus shooting at T1.9 Super 35 with semi-equivalent focal lengths, it looks pretty similar. You know, the lenses hold up, they're pretty sharp, they don't have chromatic aberration, but you get bokeh characteristics that you would not get with the Nisi Athenas. You get more cat's eye bokeh if you want that. There's just some fun character to the bokeh, and that's why these lenses were so fun for me, and I've been using them so much over the past month and a half. So in some scenarios, if you have some bokeh in the background, you're really gonna notice that cat's eye, close to a swirling effect that you might get something from like a Helios or something, not even remotely as dramatic as that. It's more in the middle, which is why these lenses are kind of nice to own versus like something you rent for a specialty. So I would rent like an iron glass or, you know, an Helios lens for something very specialty that has really wanted a lot of character. But if you want to ride the middle line between like a really nice pristine lens and a very, very characterized lens, the DoLens APO primes are for sure that. I would personally put these in my kit if I could for that exact reason. I'm gonna explain here in a little bit the one caveat about these lenses that really bums me out. But before we go, I'm gonna do a short ad for this video's sponsor, which is Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform to present your work online. You can start with one of their best-in-class templates, or using Squarespace's next-generation web design system, Fluid Engine, you can customize every detail with the reimagined drag-and-drop technology for desktop or mobile. Or maybe you want to start an online store to sell your photography or other products. Squarespace has all the built-in functionality to get one of those up and running quickly, and I've actually been using Squarespace to run my online stores for almost a decade now. And of course, if you're like me, you're probably looking to build a portfolio, which Squarespace has a ton of features for that very thing. You can even create private private galleries for client work using these tools. So if you're looking for a home for your work, well, you can just do that with Squarespace. Click the link in the description to get 10% off, and I want to thank Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Okay, so back. But there are two things about the DZOFilm APO primes that might be a deal breaker for some, or some people might want to buy these just because of that. Well, at least one of the features. And one is the flaring. Talked about this in the last video. They rainbow flare, especially the 43. When a light hits the lens, it is going to potentially wash out the lens because the coating is designed to have that more vintage feel. So you're going to lower your contrast when light hits the lens. And then also your flares are going to have a rainbow color to them. To me, I think it's pretty cool. I think it's fun. If you're trying to shoot with character anyways, might as well have a flare that looks interesting as well. I personally am not someone that's big into flares. Well, I'm not really big into anamorphic flares. I just hate a line across the screen. I want it to kind of bloom out and look kind of like an eyelash effect, you know, create a circular pattern to it that's much more natural. And these are kind of in the middle there. They kind of have like this kind of harsh flare, and there's like this rainbow to it. With coloring the footage, it kind of helps with that. Like if you're doing like a heavy color grade, you can get rid of some of that. But if you're like in Rec 709, you're really gonna notice those colors, and that may be something that would be distracting when shooting with these. If you stop them down just one stop, they basically go, that flare goes away and it's not an issue. You can mitigate it with that. 43 is the worst, the 58 does it, and the 31 has very minimal flaring compared to the other ones. But be wary of that 43. The next thing about these lenses that I think was a deal breaker for me personally is that you sort of have to treat them like an anamorphic lens. The close focus on these lenses was not good. I pretty much, if I was shooting full frame, if I was shooting speed boosted, I pretty much always wanted another 6 to 8 inches of minimum focus. So I like to shoot sometimes like, you know, on the 58 and get like real close, you know, say you're shooting B-roll, say I'm shooting around a computer, which one does a lot in the commercial space. I want to get up on the keyboard. You are going to run into a minimum focus issue. You're not going to be able to get the keys in focus and get very close to them. It gets better the wider you go on the focal lengths, like any lens would do. But generally the lenses that I wanted to shoot on the 43 and 58, I kept running into that issue. 43 was a little bit better than the 58, but it just, like, do you want to deal with diopters? Do you want to have to crop in? It's just not something that, generally speaking, I want to have to deal with a lens. Diopters are fine. You can get a nice diopter. Maybe you could put just a 0.5 diopter on there. And in most cases, you'll be able to get everything in focus. You just will lose infinity focus. That could be a workaround if you wanted to do that, but it's just not something I would want personally with a lens. I wish they were a little bit more standardized with their minimum focus. I mean, I think the minimum focus was close to, and that's pretty far from your subject, especially when you're shooting full frame and you're kind of wide and you want to push in. So definitely keep that in mind. Outside of that, I love the image quality. I love the characters on them. I love the build design. I love that you can swap the mounts. Everything else I really just liked about it. So much so that I ended up shooting so much with these. I actually shot the last 2 paid gigs I did with these, and then I shot plenty of YouTube with them, and I really like these lenses. It's gonna be awesome when they come out with the 21mm to round out the set. And now these lenses are much more available than they were. For a very long time. They were back ordered and they had a limited supply, but it seems now that they're mass producing them, and B&H even has some in stock if you would like to buy them. I also really like that they come in EF and PL, and that's kind of their standard mounts, because for me, those are the most versatile mounts on the market. A lot of people look at Sony E-mounts because there's a lot of Sony users out there. But remember, if you ever change systems, you will have to be stuck with that E-mount. And also you won't be able to use any fun adapters like ND adapters or something like the Modulate tuner. You will not be able to use those if you're strapped into one of those mirrorless mounts. So I believe EF and PL is still the way to go when it comes to buying a cinema lens set for your kit. So if you're looking for lenses that have a little bit of character, you know how the cat's eye Bokeh, and they all match, and they're very affordable at around $1,000 a piece, the DZOFilm APO primes might be the ones for you. All right, so if you have any questions about the lenses, just post those in the comments below and I'll try to answer those the best I can. And as always, guys, until next time, I'm Sensor Sakurai. See ya.